Hey, all right. Chapter 9, we made it. Um, Markets and non-markets. I'm sorry if you're getting sick of me, but this is the last one, even though I know that could never happen. So don't worry, we'll do some more of these next week. Chapter 9, markets and non-markets, kind of helps sum up the big ideas from the previous four readings. Um, so question number one, give three examples from the text where market and non-market industries overlap. So first of all, when we say market and non-market, we're basically talking about free market businesses where people have to compete and they use profits and losses and um, all the, what we think of as business. And then the non-market industries basically means government industries that are set up either through commission, regulatory commission, through antitrust laws, or just through government seizure of that industry. And so there is no market. The prices and the production are all being centrally planned. They're being coordinated by some sort of commission, by some sort of government entity. So basically talking about free market versus government industries. And the first point is just that he points out that, we can do our economy either way, and that we have lots of industries where you see where both market and non-market industries or entities are operating. He talks about schools, that you have market schools, you have private schools. That's us. We have to compete, or else we lose students, or else we go out of business if Mr. Olmsted doesn't manage our finances. People don't pay their tuition, we're gone. Um, but then you also have public schools where they are a non-market entity, and they're getting their money not from voluntary income, they're getting it from taxes, and they're being supported by the government. And even if they're inefficient, the government will still make sure they exist, even though every once time to time they close a campus or something. They can't fire their teachers. They can't do these different things. You have public universities and you have private universities. So education is one area where you see an overlap of these industries. He talks about the mail delivery. You have the post office, which is non-market, and then you have things like FedEx and UPS, which are market. You have hospitals. Again, you'll have private hospitals, but then you also have non-market government hospitals. So, or even insurance plans. You have the private insurance, and then you also have then kind of the uh, government Medicare insurance. So you see an overlap in two different ways of operating there. Another example is transportation, where you have, again, public transportation, non-market, directed by the government, or then you have things like Uber, or you have private uh, uh, forms of transportation that people can operate on their own. So we're constantly in flux, and he says the value of this is we can, first of all, we have to decide. Okay, we have to distribute resources that are scarce and have alternative uses. What's the best way to do it? And so we can do it in a market form, we can do it in a non-market form, and by looking at where these overlap, we can kind of compare. Well, which one does a better job? Which one gets us what we need? Um, and so the second question is, why are monopolies bad for an economy? Where do they tend to emerge most often, and why? And again, I think this is a good question because monopolies are bad because they represent a lack of competition. Monopolies are bad because where there's not competition, you don't have all the benefits of competition. You don't have uh, you don't have them. Basically, competition is the form of regulation in a market. How do you set the rules for a market? You have competition, because then when firms compete, they lower the cost, they keep up their standards, they become reliable. They make sure they give consumers what they want. They're making what people want, and they're making it better for them. And they change and they adapt. And so competition forces all that to happen. So the great regulator of a free market is competition. The great motivator of a free market is profit. That if I don't and losses, so that if I don't maximize my profits and minimize my losses, I'm gone. And so that's what's going to drive companies. So where there's a monopoly, these two things don't exist. If you're the only company in a certain industry, then your profit is kind of guaranteed to a large extent. You're kind of sheltered from losses forced on you by competition. You don't have to change, and so your motivation is kind of lacking as a monopoly. And you're not regulated by competition, so you don't have to worry about your costs. You don't have to worry about what consumers really want. You don't have to worry about how reliable or good a product you're putting out, and you don't have to change. You can just kind of keep doing things and follow the status quo for as long as possible. So monopolies are bad. But I think the real heart to this question is, one, know why monopolies are bad, but then also recognize, where do they tend to emerge? Not in markets, not in free markets. As I said in the last chapter video, it's really hard. And there's the quote about that competition is not this gentle flower that we need the government to come in and protect the gentle flower of competition. No, competition is a weed and it springs up everywhere. And if you don't guard yourself for half a second in a free market, somebody's going to come in and take your business. They're going to do it better than you. And you better be on your toes doing all those things that we've just listed to meet that competition. And so in markets, you do not really have a problem with monopolies, not for very long, unless you tend to impose regulatory commissions and antitrust laws. Where they tend to emerge is in non-market industries, where the government takes control. That's where they then to establish a monopoly. If you see a set monopoly where they are not very motivated by profit, where they are not regulated by competition, they're not worried about cost, they're not worried about all the things I just listed, probably is a non-market industry where the government is involved. Why? Well, because all the things from the last video in chapter 8, the government has the ability to set up what they set up and what they regulate, they then can protect and they can block competition. So again, it sounds bad to be regulated by the government, but if you're happy being a heifer who just walks in and gets milked every day and lives a life, doing nothing natural, but all your basic needs are taken care of, then you want to be regulated. And then that way the government will set you up as a monopoly and they'll make sure that you face no real threats or competition. And the reason is because in a free market, nothing can bar competition. Nobody has the power really for the long term to block competition. It's going to spring up. It's going to happen. Only when government gets involved is the power to block competition really brought to bear. And the key idea is only government has the gun. Only government has the real authority to prevent, uh, to control and direct life when it all comes down to it. You can have very powerful companies, but again, their power is nothing compared to a government which has the force of law, which ultimately means the force of the gun, fees, imprisonment, whatever government can do if you break its laws and its decrees, that it can set up ironclad boundaries to competition. And so a free market will always have competition eventually. A non-market with the power of the government is going to be able to establish long-lasting monopolies and therefore create all the negative consequences that monopolies bring with them. So while we associate monopolies with the big, powerful corporations, we need to realize that's actually not the case. That's not in reality. And that's one reason why these ideas that the big corporations are our enemies and the government is our friend, we're really missing a fundamental point because these corporations don't have the power of the gun. Yes, they can be powerful. Yes, they can do damage, but we can take care of them. The market competition can take care of them. We'll eliminate them. We, the consumers, can have power and fight back in many cases. The government, it's much harder, especially with the fourth branch of government where most of these regulators exist in the bureaucracy. It's hard to vote those people. It's hard to vote people in those commissions out of office. So we have to choose the politicians in office who might have the guts to do it, because only government has the power of the gun, and the government therefore is the threat of freezing the market, not some powerful private business. That could happen for a period of time, but it's history shows it's not going to last. Competition is a tough weed. It will spring up and it will force change. Unless you're in a non-market government-run industry. And then you're going to have these destructive, inefficient monopolies. Question number 3. Why are market-driven businesses more efficient with resources than government agencies? Give an example from the text. Again, one reason, other than this issue of monopolies, you just see that in a market economy, they're going to be more efficient because they're driven by all the things we've talked about in this week: profit and loss motives. If they can't survive, they have to be efficient with their resources. They have to watch their money. They have to pay attention to what's making money and what's costing them money. They have to pay attention to what their competitor is doing so that they can do it too. They've got to adapt. They've got to do their very, very best. Whereas again, in a non-market industry, you're protected. I think it's a really good analogy where you have an animal in the wild, that's the free market, and they're going to be fit and they're going to be adapted and they're going to be on their toes because they face real life and death consequences. Non-market industries, they're basically the domestic cow, where they're completely guarded, they're off limits. Take it to, in a Hindu nation, they're completely off limits even from eating, and they don't have to do anything. and they can just stay the same because they face no real threats and they're protected, which means they're not going to be efficient with resources. There's going to be a lot of waste and a lot of missed opportunities because they're just not motivated to do anything about it. So it's because they're fighting for survival that market-driven businesses are more efficient than government agencies. He gives the example in the book of after a hurricane, you have people who have the government insurance, FEMA, versus people who have private insurance. And it says you're going to you always see that the private people with the private insurance get it quicker and more efficient because those private insurers will risk going out of business if they don't do their job. The government agency, FEMA, is going to take its sweet time and go through all the loopholes that it's been regulated with because it's not worried about losing customers because it's not on life support. It's the domesticated cow. It's not the animal out in the wild that if it doesn't perform, it's gone. He gives the example of the Indian mail service. You look at that, where again, you have just a grossly inefficient government protected mail service versus the FedEx and the UPSs of the world that are willing to go above and beyond because they're fighting for survival. He even points out, I think, an important point that we could bash McDonald's and other fast food restaurants all we want for probably some cases the health of the food. But he points out that they have higher food standards at places like McDonald's than the USDA has for food that goes into school lunches, for all the reasons we've been talking about. And if you look at McDonald's, you've seen they've had to adapt to the marketplace. They've had to say, what, we're going to make fresher food. We're going to have a higher quality beef. We're going to try to make our nuggets not quite so sketchy. We're going to provide non-beef options for food. I think Burger King or whatever. They're making these changes because if not, they're gone. Whereas the people making the food for the government, for the school lunches, for the ones that the domestic cows, that's actually where the low quality food and products go because they don't have the same standards because they don't face the same life and death profit loss competition that the market does. And so again, you could say we could do it the other way. We can go all government, but just consider all the consequences and all the things that we're going to lose in our standard of living if we head in that direction because of the constraints and the incentives that go with a non-market industry versus the market industries. And lastly, number 4, why are winners and losers, businesses that succeed and businesses that fail and close, ultimately a good thing for an economy? This brings us full circle all the way from where we started, I think in chapter 5, in that why is it good that businesses fail? Why is it good that some succeed and make money and some don't? Again, emotionally, sometimes that seems very harsh, though again, maybe not. Maybe it makes sense to you because you want to be a winner and you like that competition. But again, it's a good thing because it means the successful are succeeding, the ones doing their job, the ones meeting the needs, the ones being efficient and giving us what we want, they're succeeding, and the ones that aren't are failing. And so that we're not wasting, the wasteful are dying out. And then again, not like they're eliminated from the population, but they die out. And now they can go, let me go do something that actually works. Let me go do something that actually is useful, something that will actually turn a profit that people want. And so it's good that there's winners and losers. Ultimately, we hate to see, something like Circuit City. Maybe you're like, oh, I love going to Circuit City. You might not even know what Circuit City is, but this electronics. Oh, Circuit City's going out of business. Or there was Barnes and Noble, or there used to be this Borders bookstore. Oh, they're going out of business. Oh, how sad, how tragic. There's an emotional attachment, but that's a good thing because what they were providing is no longer necessary. What they were providing, somebody else can provide better. As sad as it is to see, he talks about the typewriter businesses. As sad as it is to see typewriter businesses go out of business and be eliminated as failures and losers. Hey, you know what? It's because we don't use them anymore. They're not as good of a product. They're a novelty. There's something for antique shops, and you can probably meet the need by providing a niche business for those people who want to have one of those just because they're cool. But for everybody else, what's really useful is not typewriters. So it's good that they are no longer in business. So it's good to have winners and losers. And we don't want to protect the losers because we feel bad for them, which is what, again, a non-market government industry will do. They'll protect that. We want to let them die out and come back as something even better because they are strengthened by competition. So our market or non-market economies and firms better at achieving this. We've already said it. The market will achieve this because they have the incentive They're gonna fight to win, and they have the vulnerability that if they don't fight to win, they're gone. They're gonna perform or get out. And again, that sounds harsh, but we're trying to meet people's needs. And we're trying to meet people's needs, and what meets people's needs in an economy is the incentives of competition. In the non-market, that's lacking. They're not competing. They're not strengthened by competition, and so they're going to stick with a failure uh, for perpetuity, because that's what they were created to do, and that's the way they've always done it. And there's no incentive or competition to make them do otherwise. So again, you're going to have starkly different quality of life depending on which form of a way you want your resources distributed in your economy. You want it done in a market, kind of again in the wild, or do you want it in the cushioned form of a non-market? Because there's very big differences. And again, this is big time stuff that we're talking about in our nation. And again, you can see how there's an emotional response and then there's a reality. And we want to and there's a political view of it. And then again, there's a what actually helps people. And we want to help people. We want to do the right thing. And we want to have our needs met. We want to have a high quality of living, not only for us, but for everybody. And understanding these things better allows us to do that. So hopefully you're getting a little bit of that revelation from these readings. I know I joked, but I know it was a lot this week. So um, I pray that you get some revelation and keep us free and prosperous.